So throughout the decades of heavy metal album covers, there's been some amazing artwork, some incredible concepts and all that. There have also been some covers that are, shall we say, aesthetically challenged, which is a nice way to put it. Some pretty bad album covers in general. In this video, we're going to go through some of the latter. I'm going to pull 10 from my own vinyl collection. We're going to take a look at them. We might talk about the albums as well quite a bit. They are so bad, they're good. Maybe good, kind of good. You'll decide on that, I'm sure. But anyways, let's do this. So just going through my vinyl collection, I realized I could have picked some straight studio album releases here, but I also found, and maybe more so, that my metal compilation albums, particularly from the 1980s, had quite a bit of bad cover art. I think some of it is probably because of a lot of these fledgling record labels. They didn't have a lot of money, they couldn't afford the big artists, so they just went with whoever they could find. At least that's my theory of how that works. So I'm definitely going to go through 10 of those metal compilation albums, specifically from the 1980s. Let's do it. First up is a compilation from Megaforce Records released in 1984. This is Born to Metallize. Great title. We got a few bands on here. The Beast, Sneak Attack, Tortured Dog, and Hades. I love the blurb here. Spirits of steel no longer mourn. Your children have risen to carry your scorn. Restoring the airways from what we despise. You were born to metallize. Amazing. Just show you the record here. We've got the original Megaforce labels on there. We've also got a pretty decent inner sleeve here with releases from Megaforce Records. You might recognize a couple of these here. Also lyrics from all the bands on the reverse. But this cover, man, it's amazing. Watercolor, it looks to be. I don't know if there was a need for watercolor. Usually people go with other media, but there it is. You've got the baby, or maybe baby, sure, why not, playing with the mobile of guitars. You have Marshall stacked there with absolutely nothing hooked to it. Cool record. You got Metallica and Exciter down there. Why not? I like the Hanged Man in the window as well, and all of that. So, yeah, it's a cool little comp. Of the four bands on here, Hades is obviously the best known band. They got signed to Combat Records later. They put out a bunch of albums. I remember in 1987 they put out one called Resisting Success. I think I owned it for a short period of time. But yeah, Hades. Why not? Anyways, this is Born to Metallize from Megaforce Records. Next up is Heavy Metal Monster Festival, released in 1987 by Mercury Records. This was a German release. You can tell by all the extra symbols and text all over it that it's minimally European. The US records didn't have this much busyness on the disc label. A mix of bands on here, some AOR hard rock bands and some classic bands. There are more metal bands on here as well. It's a bit of a mix. I don't think that's too much of an accident. This is a European release, and if I remember correctly, a lot of European compilation albums at the time had this kind of mix on it. They would go with some AOR hard rock bands, but then go with these very heavy metal bands, which is pretty interesting. I mean, you got Bon Jovi and who else? Heavy Pettin and Victory, but you also have Accept and Black Sabbath and other bands like that. Warlock's on here as well. And it's pretty interesting. There are also bands on here I don't really know very well. I don't know who Choco is, and Skagerrak as well. Maybe they're a bit more known in Europe at the time. I'm not really sure. But yeah, interesting mix of bands on this particular compilation. As for the artwork on this one, it's just an ugly old witch, which I guess if you're a Bon Jovi or Cinderella fan, that's the artwork you're going to go for, right? It's not going to be the big-breasted girl with the wet t-shirt kind of look. No, it's going to be her instead. Who knows why? But it's heavy metal, and it's a monster festival, so sure, why not? Anyways, Heavy Metal Monster Festival by Mercury Records. Next up is Hell on Earth, released in 1983 by Music for Nations, with a giant hand on the cover, though it's bleeding, so that's something. Music for Nations 12, for those who collect records from this label. Pretty cool. Nice mix of bands. We've got Manowar, we got Virgin Steel, Battle Axe, Metallica, and Tank. Merciful Fate's here as well. But then we also have Rox and Talus and Rat. Rat, of course, was making the rounds. This is Sweet Cheater, but they were also on Metal Massacre 1 with Tell the World. So they're definitely popping up on some of these comps. This is kind of before they made it. Some pretty cool tracks. The choices, I don't know. I mean, Warlord from Manowar, I might have picked Gloves of Metal. What was another one? Metal Militia from Metallica, I might have picked Whiplash. But, you know, all in all, it's a pretty cool comp. Show you the vinyl. Music for Nations. We all know this disc label. Sign of quality every time. Anyways, yeah, you know, the one thing I look at this cover and I see this hand, I think there's probably a much cooler beastie kind of looking dude attached to this hand. I like it if the virtual camera, if you will, could pull back and see more of what's going on rather than just a hand. I might have preferred that a little bit more, but other than that, it's all right. Anyways, this is Hell on Earth by Music for Nations. Next up is Metal for Breakfast, released in 1984 by Attic Records. That's a Canadian label. And what's funny about this, and maybe I'm seeing a little too much into this, is that the two primary colors here are red and white, which is the Canadian flag. I don't know if that's an accident. I do like that he's pouring what looks like milk, but it's likely glue onto a bunch of ball bearings, because that's a metal breakfast, I guess. He looks pretty stoned. I think that's intentional. There you are. There's the back where he's had too much breakfast and clearly needs to be this. Anyways, the mix of bands on here is kind of strange. There are a few Canadian bands. Anvil's here, Blotto, whoever they are, Killer Dwarves, Lee Aaron. This is a strange mix of like current metal bands at the time. There's also some 70s stuff in here too. The Ripper from Judas Priest. I'm also seeing Cat Scratch Fever from Ted Nugent. But then you get Merciful Fate with Black Funeral. It's interesting when Merciful Fate shows up on these comps that are otherwise not very Merciful Fate musically speaking. That's kind of fascinating. But yeah, Attic Records again. Just to see the label there. Looks like that. But yeah, you know, kind of a dumb photo. Again, Metal Breakfast. You know, the only Metal Breakfast I want is Metal Breakfast Radio, which is a podcast you can look up that my friend Dave Ingram does. There's a plug for you, Dave. But that's all I got. Anyways, Metal Breakfast from Attic Records. Next up is Metal Killers from 1984, released by Castle Killers Records, a label that put out 3 compilation albums and then went away. Amazing. Anyways, a bit of a mix of bands here. There are a couple 70s bands and some Nawabum bands, a couple American bands. Some of the choices on here are pretty interesting. I think Judas Priest with Rockarola. I'm thinking that Priest put out a million great songs between then and 1984. You could have picked anything. Pretty fascinating. 2 Twisted Sister songs, Destroyer and Under the Blade from the first album, except with Fast as a Shark. Then you got Nazareth with Hair of the Dog. Some other bands here too. I do like the Diamond Head track here, Out of Phase, even though I prefer earlier stuff from them. Sabbath Bloody Sabbath from Black Sabbath. Why not start the record with a classic? Anyways, I did want to talk about this artwork just a little bit. Clearly his head's too small for his body. That skull is bigger than his own head. There's a lot of perspective issues going on here. Killers clearly looks like the Iron Maiden album title. And yeah, and pterodactyls. I don't believe they existed concurrently with humans. But, you know, it's a fantasy cover. I'll go with it. The guitar, of course, is too tiny for his hands and all that. But yeah, Metal Killers. This kind of looks like K-Tel art gone horribly wrong, because I don't think they'd go this route. But yeah, that's what I get out of it. So anyways, Metal Killers by Castle Killers Records. Next up is New York Metal 84, which was released in, yes, you guessed it, 1984 by Rock City Records. I got a bunch of bands on here. Some of them are obscure. A few of them are rather known. Cities is one of those bands. Some metal fans at the time might have known. They became a little bit more famous when AJ Pero of Twisted Sister joined them a couple years later. We got Virgin Steel on here, of course, and Overkill, best of all. Cool thing about the Overkill track on here is it's an early version of Feel the Fire. It's really worth buying this for that alone. This is 1984, so they put out their EP at that time. It sounds like it's from the same sessions. I'm going to say it is. Other bands are Warhead, Takashi, Teaser, Black Lace, Death Slayer, and Frigid Bitch. If you know any of those bands, let me know in the comments. But yeah, let's talk about this cover. The guy's wearing a goddamn diaper, and that's crazy. I never really knew that infantilism by candlelight was a metal thing, but apparently it is. The dominatrix lady makes a little bit more sense, but yeah. Can you imagine being this dude going to a party and people are like, hey, you're the diaper dude. Awesome. Says no one ever. But yeah, still a good comp. Again, more obscure bands, but for that Overkill song, it's well worth the cost. Cost, depending on how much you pay for it. Anyways, there's the label, and there it is. New York Metal, 84. Next up is Rayvon Hits Hard, released in 1985 by Rayvon Records. Some people might think that label sounds at least a little bit familiar. Of course, Rayvon released the first Merciful Fate EP. In fact, Merciful Fate's on this as well with A Corpse Without Soul. Kind of makes sense. There were other bands on this label as well. We got Sortilege, we got H-Bomb, Evil, Gilgamesh, Crossfire, Astaroth. Some Belgian bands, some French bands. A nice little mix there. Yeah, I do want to talk about this cover, however. It's basically the metal girls versus the disco kids. Amazing. I love the fetish horse. You know, he's having a good time there. The girls look mildly interested in what they're doing at best. I like this one in particular. She looks like she's trying to hold off the disco kids with flatulence. Maybe she's trying to kick them, I'm not really sure, but that's not what it looks like to me. Yeah, Rayvon was a cool label. I don't think they really lasted very long, but, you know, again, that Merciful Fate EP is pretty awesome. It's one of the reasons why I sought out this compilation is because of that album, that EP. So yeah, Rayvon Hits Hard, and there's your label for you right there. So there it is. Metal Girls versus Disco Kids. Next up is a compilation called 100% Pure Metal Samplers from Roadrunner Records, released in 1984, with this totally new wave artwork going on. 8 heavy bands, as it says, 3 of which you probably know. There's Merciful Fate, there's Battle Axe, there's Jaguar. Plus, we also have Mad Max, Darkheart, Sam Ain. Not Sam Hain, mind you. Also, Spartan Warrior and Blackouts. Let's see the back for some more new wave artwork. Totally isn't metal. Interestingly enough, 2 bands are missing their album jacket artwork. They probably weren't released yet or available. That's pretty interesting. Also, some of the song titles are some creative license taken with them. The Merciful Fate track is Don't Break the Oath, which is The Oath. I don't know if that was an early title for the song or not, but Roadrunner could have screwed it up as well, because I know on the disc label on this record, which I can show you here, classic Roadrunner labels, the Battle Axe song called Power of the Universe is Power from the Universe on the disc label, and then the song Vibrations of Doom from Sam Ain is called Vibrators of Doom. What an amazing screw up. I'm sure Sam Ain was quite happy about that. Anyways, it's in association with Attic Records, because I'm going to assume this is a Canadian pressing as a result, maybe for the Canadian market specifically. But yeah, and here's the cover again. Again, not quite metal. I mean, if it wasn't for the guitar, you just wouldn't know, but still a really cool sampler. $1.99 list price, which is an amazing price. Even in 1984, records back then were between $7 and $8. So it's a pretty decent price for a sampler from this up-and-coming label. It's a label now that we all know and love. But yeah, did want to show the insert here. Guaranteed heavy. Some great albums, some great bands, all of that. Some Anvil, some Riot. I see Killer Dwarves on here. We got some Canadian bands happening for sure, as well as some others. You got Motorhead, you got Judas Priest, whole bunch of bands there. I love these, by the way. Fantastic. But there's your cover again. One little short story about this one. I did buy this on Discogs sometime back from a seller. He sent me, this is the second copy he sent me. The first one he sent me was totally warped. In fact, if there wasn't a spindle hole, you could have eaten soup out of the damn thing. It was such a concave bowl shape. So I told him that, and he's like, oh, I've got another copy for you. Clearly a perfect copy. And I'm like, okay, were you trying to sell the crappy copy first to see if you could get away with it? And then we get called on it. You got this one in the wings. I don't know. I'm a little bit of a cynical bastard when it comes to this kind of stuff, but I think that's the story. But anyways, really happy I have this one. This is 100% Pure Metal Sampler from Roadrunner Records. Next up is Total Destruction, released in 1984 by Metal Blade Records. Fantastic listing of bands here, a few of which have been on previous Metal Blade comps, to be honest, including Demon Flight and Pandemonium. But we also get Bitch, Slayer, Obsession, Savage Grace, Warlord, Trouble, Witch Killer, and another Bitch song, of course. Of the first two songs here, Be My Slave and Die by the Sword, they are remixes. They are not the final studio versions. So that might be a reason to get this comp. They're actually pretty decent. They also advertise some other Metal Blade releases here. This was definitely released between Metal Massacre 5 and 6, if you just need the chronology of this one. It's pretty cool. Love Metal Blade, of course. They're still around, still kicking. They're the classic silver labels from the label. Labels from the labels. There you go. Artwork. Who knows what this guy's up to, this hooded figure. He's kind of just shrugging like, is it total destruction? Is it not total destruction? I don't know. But there he is. Killer comp. Total Destruction by Metal Blade Records. Next up is the first in a series of compilation albums released by Shrapnel Records. This is US Metal. This one came out in 1981. So this has got to be a very early release for Shrapnel because the label was formed a year previous in 1980. Has a number of guitar shredder types on their label, or they did when they were around. I don't know if they're still around. Let me know in the comments. Jason Becker, Marty Friedman, Tony McAlpine, David Chastain, of course. Some interesting bands came off this label. The first Exciter album, Heavy Metal Maniac, is on Shrapnel. The debut album from Steeler. All those Chastain albums, at least in the 80s for the most part, came out on that label. It's a pretty cool label. Very guitar-centric, which is why you're seeing a bunch of army guys trying to kill other dudes with guitars. Pretty amazing. And each guy has a different name of an artist or band that's on Shrapnel on their uniforms. That's kind of fun. More Carnage on the back here. Fantastic. Most of the artists I'm not really familiar with. This is the early days of Shrapnel, so some of the bigger names aren't on here. Except that the Rods are on here, which is pretty interesting. The Rods have been around since the 70s. They got a little heavier as they went in the 1980s. By 81, they're kind of getting there, but never really been into the Rods, so not that big of a deal to me. There's the original green Shrapnel labels. They also had black, and they had silver as well. It's a pretty cool comp. I also have Volume 4 in my collection, and all of that. So, yeah, US Metal. So definitely let me know in the comments which of these you thought were the worst of the worst. Hell, let me know if you love all these covers, or you've got worse in your collection, or any of that. Let me know that, and anything else relevant in the comments below. Of course, just in case you didn't know this, this was a sort of de facto thread response video, the originator of which is Andy over at the Cloudy Milder YouTube channel. You should definitely check out his original video. I'll leave a link to it in the description of my video. Go check that out. Go check out his channel. Give him a sub. Watch his videos. He's fantastic. And as for this channel, how you doing? My name is Matt. This is the Accusation Network, where each and every week I do videos on metal vinyl collecting, as well as videos on classic and modern metal bands in general. If that sounds like something you're interested in, you should definitely give this video a like, subscribe to the channel, and share some of my videos with a few of your friends. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.